start. Good evening. This is Sharon Barnes, licensed clinical social worker, also known as the Scrap Lady. I help creative, sensitive, and or gifted people create beauty and benefit from life scraps. And we are here on this LifeCraft webinar this evening to talk about why or what to do when sensitive or gifted children or teens are traumatized. And typically on a call like this, there are some people who have children or grandchildren who have been traumatized. Sometimes they have students that have been traumatized, and sometimes it's adults who have been traumatized as children. And so we're going to address all of these issues that so that no matter which of these situations that you have, you'll find help and relevance here. This topic came to my attention in a very dramatic way a number of years before. This house in the lower picture on this slide is one that I moved into 6 weeks before the Columbine High School shooting. And I was this was in the Columbine School District, and my house was less than a mile away from Columbine High School. So trauma and traumatization really came to the forefront of my clinical practice and my attention. I couldn't walk around the neighborhood without seeing evidence in the neighborhood of people who had lost children or had people injured. The whole community was affected in a very dramatic way. And I would say that's really the beginning of my focusing a significant amount of my practice on trauma and trauma recovery. But let's ask the question that's a very important question: why talk about sensitive or gifted kids and trauma? First of all, when we don't talk about such things, they go underground and they come out in unexpected and negative ways. And talking about this really does help. And in fact, we'll come back to this later, that telling the story of the traumatization is really important. And so it's really important to us to find out what does help and what does not help. It's also important that people understand that trauma can be coped with, and a lot of trauma can be healed when well treated. And certainly the sooner all of this happens, the better, which is why there's a whole field of trauma debriefing that has developed, because we've learned more and more about what helps in trauma. So who is it that can benefit from this discussion? And on my slide, I have parents, grandparents, and teachers of sensitive kids or teens or adults who've experienced a life-threatening incident of any kind. And I'm also going to say often the teens themselves can benefit from hearing this as well and having this discussion. So someone who's experienced a life-threatening incident of any kind, or something that they have perceived as a life-threatening incident is also it, and we'll get into the definition of trauma in a little bit. Also, someone who has witnessed a life-threatening event, whether that the life-threatening aspect has to do with oneself or with someone else that they're observing. Examples of this is one's own illness or illness of someone close to us. Surgery that we go through or surgery that someone else goes through. An auto accident, a natural disaster, a flood, an avalanche, a fire, a lightning strike, etc. And daily news shows showing any of this, crime scenes, etc. I'm wondering if anybody on the call can think of and would like to mention some other kind of trauma that comes to mind for you. I'll pause here for a moment and see if anybody wants to put something in the chat window. looks like we've covered it well enough anyway for the moment. And what's the big deal? Isn't everybody affected by trauma? Well, yes, obviously everyone is. However, CASIGY, being creative, complex, curious, acutely aware, super sensitive, intense, and sometimes gifted, have a higher, there's a higher impact on them than on other people with the same things happening. If, say, there's a trauma that impacts other people, say, on a scale of 5 out of 10 of possible impact, people who are super sensitive, highly sensitive, people who are gifted, which fall into the highly sensitive and often the super sensitive category, and who have intense reactions to things, are going to respond at a higher level than that 5. So the impact on them is going to be even greater. So it takes less of something happening to create the same negative effect in a creative, highly aware, super sensitive, intense, and or gifted person than it does in anyone else. So in this group of people, it's really, really important. And sometimes people ask, can you really heal from trauma? And I think that's a really good question, because we've all been around people who have not healed from trauma and who, A, traumatize everyone else around them, or are continually traumatized by life. So that raises a very legitimate question of what's going on here? Why have they not been healed? And in order to answer this totally accurately, we'd have to know something about each different person that we're referring to. But generally speaking, coping comes first and is possible for everyone. Healing and transformation are not necessarily possible for everyone. Coping involves being more conscious of what gets us set off that's related to trauma and what to do about it. And coping is about taking charge of how we relate to our past and our present. And these coping skills are things that all of us can learn and can do to improve our relationship with our present and our past, and is something we're really going to focus on tonight. Healing is becoming strong in the broken places. Like if you break a leg or an arm or some other bone, that bone is healed, but it is never again exactly the same as it was before. And it doesn't work to pretend that nothing hurtful ever happened. And sometimes the expectation is that healing is turning back the clock and taking us to a place or a state of being that we were in before we were wounded. And that's not realistic for healing. But becoming strong in the broken places is very realistic and is possible for many, many people. Transformation goes beyond healing, and only a few people are called to feel this inner draw to a pilgrimage and to seeking transformation, just like not everyone wants to climb Mount Everest. And those who do can't imagine anything else, and those who don't aren't interested. There's a few people who are in that kind of in-between place and kind of struggle with it and want to, but don't have, like, for example, climb Mount Everest, don't have the physical strength or health to, and don't, stay in this place of wanting it but not having it. And that can be a tough thing when it's transformation that we're talking about. The majority of people either aren't interested, don't want to go there, or want it and are willing to do whatever it takes to get it, which is typically what it does take, and no one can ever say ahead of time what that's going to be. So why do I talk about this? Besides my experience with the Columbine high school shooting and the trauma effects there, I talk about this because I also experienced trauma, and the trauma that I experienced was when living, this is actually a picture, a photograph in recent years of a house that I lived in northern Wisconsin when I was a young child. And it's a house out in the country, as you can see a typical North Midwest farm with a red barn and a stand of evergreen trees behind, and there was also an apple orchard behind, and there's a row of lilac bushes here. And I don't honestly know if this picture was late fall, early spring, don't know, but the grass is brown and there's no leaves on the trees. And it's interesting, there's this one gigantic tree here. Well, on the right side of the house, there used to be another gigantic tree. And that tree got struck by lightning in the middle of the night during a thunderstorm. And a huge chunk of that tree came down, hit the side of the house, shook the whole house, and I thought the sky was falling. I thought the whole house was falling from the noise, from the vibration, from everything. And I called and called and called for help, and no one came, and that made me even more certain that everybody else in my family was dead and that I was about to die. Now, the house was not broken. The house was not falling down, but I didn't know that. I didn't know that until the sun came up the next morning and I could see that the rest of the house was there. And then when the rest of the family woke up, my brother slept through the whole thing. He's 4 years older than I, and I was either 3 or 4 at the time. He slept through the whole thing, didn't hear a thing. My parents didn't sleep through it, but didn't think it was important to answer my calls for help, interestingly enough. And when I was an adult, I asked them about it, and that's a whole different story. But so there's a kind of trauma experience where you can actually be in a life-threatening situation. There's another called vicarious traumatization where you can feel or think like you are or be observing someone else in a traumatic situation. So here are 7 signs of a normal response to trauma. One is hyperarousal. Your central nervous system, the fight or flight response, is activated. And it is activated at a high level and activated much of the time. And your startle response, along with that, is hyper. It takes almost nothing to startle you. This is a normal response with someone that has been in a traumatic situation or that has been traumatized by either direct trauma, vicarious trauma, either one of those. Number 2 is constriction of emotion. In other words, you no longer have the full range of emotion at your access. You may be frozen in a fearful state. You may be frozen in a kind of giddy, too happy state. And by too happy, I mean unrealistically happy, happy that doesn't match the situation. You may be frozen in some other aspect of emotion, but you don't have the whole range of emotion available to you. Or your physical movements may be limited as well. Your body may be in a partially frozen. Your thoughts or movements may be in this freezing or frozen state as well. You may have seen an animal who has been in a life-threatening situation, threatened by an automobile or a gun or one animal chasing another, and you may have observed that they go into this freeze mode. Well, that happens to humans too, but not quite in the same way. But these are the kinds of things that I'm talking about here. Hypervigilance is totally constantly being on the alert for danger and not being totally convinced that there isn't danger, even when everybody else around you is sure that there is none. Having intrusive memories or imagery or flashbacks of the traumatic situation. And again, it doesn't matter if it was truly life-threatening or just perceived as life-threatening, or if it is life-threatening to oneself or observed to others. The intrusive memories and imagery and flashbacks can all happen. And that can be in awake states, that can be in dreaming of the traumatic event. And of course, if it's dreaming, it's going to create disrupted sleep. People also may have difficulty falling asleep when they've had dreams that are like this. And certainly they'll be awakened in the night and can have difficulty getting back to sleep. Appetite can be disrupted, and typically that goes of one or two directions. One is we have a voracious appetite and just can't get enough food, or food is just unappetizing and unappealing, and we have a hard time eating enough to sustain ourselves. And then mood swings can go along with this. Having no stress tolerance, no frustration tolerance can be part of it. We can be happy one minute and sad the next. And these mood swings are different from, say, bipolar mood swings. Bipolar mood swings are mood swings that go on for days and days or hours, and a person doesn't feel the need of sleep and has this super high manic mood that can go on for days or weeks. Or this deep depression mood swings is up and down quickly and kind of unpredictable mood swings that don't match what's going on in the moment, or that are exaggerated in response to what's going on in the moment. All of these things, and I had 7, but there's really 8 here. So you got a bonus one. You didn't pay close enough attention when I was writing this. Or maybe I intended to give an extra one. I don't know at this moment. But either way, so these 8 things are very typical. And if you've got all 8 of them, that's pretty strongly pointing to the possibility of there being a trauma response going on. So I promised to share with you the first, best, last tool that you can use anywhere and anytime. And that is to breathe. And at the bottom of the page, I have a URL, a web page that you can go to, and you can download the instructions for this and a couple of other breathing tools. But I want to take a moment and go through this one. This is a relaxation de-escalation breathing exercise that comes from Ayurvedic medicine, and it flips the switch. I think I did that last time I talked about this one, from the fight or flight response to the relaxation response. So if you feel your body escalating into fight or flight response when it in a way that's not helpful or that's out of sync with what's happening, this is a really good thing to do. So you put your tongue on the roof of your mouth, you breathe out and count to 8, breathe in and count to 4, hold your breath for 7, and repeat the cycle at least 4 times. So let's do it together. And when we do it together, you're not in control of the pace. When you do this on your own, you're in control of the pace of it. If you find yourself yawning or feeling short of breath, you need to speed it up or breathe in a lot more in relation to the breathing out, because you're breathing in twice as fast as you are breathing out. So that's something to be aware of. So, okay, let's start. So put your tongue on the roof of your mouth and breathe out to a count of 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. 1, 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. Out. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. In. 2, 3, 4. Hold. 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. That was 4 cycles. And even though I can't do it fully while I'm talking it through, I can feel a de-escalation in my inner stress level, in my inner fight or flight response activation, even when I can only do it partially. This is something that, like any mind and body tool, that it takes practice to really be proficient in it. So I recommend practicing it at least once a day, not at a time when you need it, so that when you really do need it, it's available to you. Another few tools here. Once it's got the breathing kind of reconnected, what's next? Telling the story of the trauma over and over again is really important. And when you find yourself, or when you hear someone else telling the same story over and over and over again, that's often a sign that there's some trauma behind it, or there's an emotional need here that's being filled with telling the story over and over and over again. One of the things that can bring people into therapy around trauma is when there is a need to tell the story over and over again, and yet friends and family are sick of hearing it because they don't understand the benefit and they don't know what to do with it as well. Along with telling the story, it can be very helpful to identify what physical sensations you're feeling, or to ask your child or your student or whoever you're with that's in the trauma experience, what physical sensations, and the next one is emotions. And we've talked before in some of my other webinars about the importance of identifying both the physical sensations and the emotions that we experience and connecting them. It's even more important when a person's in a trauma response. And if the child or teen can't identify them, then you guess for them. Often when we are with a child or a teen that is out of touch with what's going on inside of them, they're acting it out, or it's evident in their facial expression or their body language. And so it's not difficult to say, I wonder if you're not feeling sad, or I wonder if you're remembering what happened with the car accident and if you're not feeling frightened or startled or whatever we think that they might be going through internally, whatever their body language or cues. That, number one, gives them permission, and number two, it models for them, and it helps them to begin to identify what's going on inside of them, both physiologically and emotionally. And that's quite a process. All of this is really quite a process. There are two primary guiding principles. There are some others, but these are the primary ones. Is number one, that's important is to learn healthy coping skills and to learn how to soothe ourselves in healthy ways, because our default methods are often helpful on the front end and hurtful on the back end. Eating more than we are used to, or more than is normal healthy portions, and or eating totally comfort foods because that's what we're attracted to, and which a lot of sugar, a lot of fat, etc., turn into alcohol in the body and very much affect us like alcohol does, which alcohol is a depressant. And so we feel better initially because it numbs the pain a little, but in the end, alcohol depresses us more than we already were. And any other substances, legal or illegal, prescribed or over-the-counter, doesn't matter. If we are using substances to manage our moods continually, they are not helping us in the long run. If we find ourselves overspending or afraid to spend money even when we have it, either one of those can be, again, a coping mechanism which can be hurtful, because we can be afraid to spend money on healthy food even though we have it, the money for it. Or we can overspend and get ourselves in debt, and that has huge consequences as well. Smoking tobacco, smoking marijuana, similarly help us feel better on the front end, but when they're used continually to manage mood, and I'm not talking about using marijuana for pain control, for legitimate illness, etc. I'm talking about self-soothing from the effects of trauma. These are, and temporary distraction can be, but if all we do is distract ourselves, even that can be a thing that's helpful initially, but unhelpful in the long run. There are many things which we can do to soothe ourselves that are really healthy. Drinking water can be very helpful, and it can help wash through and cleanse the body from the toxins that are released in the fight or flight response. Mild to moderate exercise, physical exercise, can be very helpful because that uses up the biochemicals that are dumped in a fight or flight response. Taking a warm bath, lighting candles can be soothing. There's lots of these kinds of things, and that are healthy and not hurtful, and that can help us. The breathing exercises are some other things. And it can be very helpful to make a list of things that you know that are soothing to yourself and that are not the unhelpful, hurtful things. Sometimes it can also be helpful to make a list of things I tend to do which are going to harm me in the long run, and have those listed out, but things that soothe me and help me, which are good for me. Have both of those lists so that when you get in a place where you need them, you're also often not able to think of them. So if you have those lists ready ahead of time and you find yourself, oh yeah, I'm reaching for a cigarette and that's really not going to be helpful to me, here's something to do instead. So have your instead list ready and your red flag list ready so that you can use it. And temporary distraction can be watching a comedy on TV, or reading a good book, or playing with, your dog or cat or a grandchild, or your child, or talking to a friend on the phone. There's lots of temporary, again, as long as it's temporary distraction, it can go on the helpful thing list. The second guiding principle is called containment. you put a temporary fence around overwhelming physical or emotional reactions. It's not the same as repression, which is where we banish it from our memory altogether, or suppression, where we push it down and keep it down. But it is, say, writing or drawing the issue or the memory or the situation. So you give yourself a fence around and a safe place in which to do this, physical space or space and time, to do this, to bring it up. You write or draw or something like that. And then you fold up that paper and put it in an actual physical container. The physical container is really a metaphor for a psychic container. So the coping is number one and the containment is number two. Later, you can take them out and face and deal with them, but in the moment when they come up and they're intrusive, it can be very helpful to get them on a piece of paper represented in some way and then put it in a container. And that can help you emotionally and mentally contain the intrusive memories or intrusive sensations. So here's some more tools. If those aren't enough, sometimes physical holding, so if you have a child or a teenager that just gets overwhelmed by all of this, holding them, if they want it, if they can tolerate it, if they will let you, don't force it by any means, or that can be re-traumatizing. But that can be very comforting if they can tolerate it. Sometimes that's too much and it's not tolerated, so again, I would never force it. Getting a massage, a back rub, muscle rub can be all very helpful as well, particularly if we're carrying a lot of muscle tension around it. And another thing is to draw, color, paint, non-verbally express the emotion and the stress. And like we already said, put it in an actual physical container. If none of these things seem accessible, if none of these things are helping, then it can be very helpful to consult with a professional in an online class or a local class or one-on-one or you and your child or teenager together kind of thing. So those are what to do with your child or teen if the other things don't help. Now, I'm going to do something tonight that I have not done on any of my other prior webinars, and that's because we have only been able to scratch the surface of what there is in terms of helpfulness around trauma. But I want to qualify this, that this is not for you, if you think talking about and paying attention to trauma and coping with trauma and healing from trauma, if you think that's a bunch of hooey, then what I'm going to talk about next is not for you. If this topic gives you the willies and it's just kind of too much, then this is not for you. If you think that people who've experienced trauma should just get over it, then what I'm going to talk about is not for you. This might be for you if what I have said already piques your interest and you want the chance to ask more questions, and not just one or two questions, but quite a few questions. And if you feel like this is going to help you with your students or your loved ones or yourself to either cope with or heal from trauma, then this might be for you. And what this is an online class that's going to be starting next week, Wednesday evening, same time as the class tonight or the webinar tonight. What we're going to learn and talk about next week is direct trauma versus vicarious trauma. And also three things to do differently about vicarious traumatization than direct traumatization. We have alluded to them a little bit tonight, but we'll have more time to get into some depth with that. And we're going to talk about 4 specific ways to address the inherent stress of trauma exposure. The next week on November 5, it's still 7 p.m., but note that it's Mountain Standard Time. Now, if you're in a time zone that switches from daylight savings time to standard time, I believe we all switch on the same date, which is November 2. So it's going to be between those 2 classes. If you're in a state that doesn't switch or a country that doesn't switch, then the time will be different for you than it was tonight. So on Wednesday the 5th of November, we're going to talk about 5 more guiding principles to help you when you don't know what to do, to help your child or your teen or yourself with the trauma that's being experienced or faced. And we're going to talk about a 4-step process to transform the loss of meaning that often accompanies trauma. Trauma unhooks us from our assumptions about life. And that can undermine the sense of meaning that we have in life. And so we're going to talk about what to do about that piece of it, because that can be really significant. The next week, November 12th, I just repeated myself. Apparently, I made a mistake on the outline. Isn't that lovely? Because there was something else that belonged in that place. We are going to talk about one of the most powerful yet hidden tools parents and teachers have to help CASIGY kids and teens cope and heal from trauma. This is really powerful, and yet it's not obvious. And so if you are caring for kids or teens, if they're your family, if they're your students, this is the biggie of what's really powerful and not obvious to do to help them. And I so wish I could think of what else we're going to do on the 12th. Hopefully it'll come to mind and I can come back to that. On the 19th, we're going to talk about a 3-step process to help transform your child's or teen's or your own pain into gain. And we're actually going to have a chance to use this process and practice this a bit during the webinar. And we're going to talk about how to use these tools for yourself, and what to do differently for yourself than you would for your child or your teen. And this applies and is relevant whether it's current or past trauma that you face. And we'll talk about 3 ways to know when and when not to seek professional help about a trauma response. So to recap, the Sky is Falling 4-week online class, Wednesday, October 29 to November 19th, 7 p.m. Mountain Time. And these will go for an hour and a half. They'll be a little bit longer. I'm limiting these to 10 people to allow for group participation. And the investment is $120 per person, which is less than one in-person therapy session and less than 2 group therapy sessions. So here's the website to go to, or a shortened, an abbreviated, if you like, the short link instead of the long link. So there's how to sign up for the class. We have about 5 minutes left that we can open up for questions. And so I'm going to ask that you go ahead and put your questions in the chat window, and then I will repeat them and share them with you before I address them. So one question we have here is, what about a child who has these symptoms or signs of trauma, but you don't know of any trauma that this child has been through, and they aren't speaking of any? I would say if you're a teacher, that I would share your concern with the child's parents and share with them what you're seeing and hearing, what you're observing in the child's behavior that fits the trauma symptoms, and specifically what's going on that makes you think that that's what it is. And I would I would ask to meet in person with the child's parents and share it in person, and not just do it through an email or a phone call, but meet with them in person. And if the child's parents are unconcerned, if the child's parents are adamant that there's nothing wrong, or are not open to exploring the possibilities that this child might have had a traumatic experience, then, and here's a drastic one, but one that I think is really important to be aware of and to follow through. In most states, teachers are mandatory reporters. I know certainly mental health professionals, medical professionals are mandatory reporters in most states. And that means that you would need to make a phone call to your local child protection hotline and tell whoever you talk to there about your concerns and your observations and your conversation with the child's parents and their unhelpful response. If you are the parent of a child that you believe is having a trauma response and the child denies everything and doesn't respond to anything that you do to try to help them with it, then that would be an indicator that this person needs some professional help, some professional assessment by someone who is trained and skilled in dealing with children with trauma responses, children or teenagers, whichever it is. Another question that's come up is, what if yourself or some other adult that you know has signs and symptoms of trauma response, but no specific memories of any trauma? I would go through and do these same, I would use the coping skills that we talked about. And I would, when you get a response that tells you, that fits the trauma response, the hypervigilance, the kind of any of them really, I would really pay attention, and it can be very helpful to write these things down, because as you write them down, you no longer carry them inside of you in quite the same way as if you just keep them in your head. When you write them down, that you kind of take them outside of you, and there's again, a containment. You're no longer the only container for it. The paper that you wrote it on or drew it on, whatever, that can help contain whatever this energy is. I would really focus on writing down what's going on inside of you physiologically and emotionally, and what was happening outside of you. What was the events going on in your life just before that this internal reaction took place, or the day before you had nightmare dreams, or that kind of thing. Keeping track of your inner process can really help to be open to oneself in a deeper way and open to discovery. If that isn't possible to do, if that's too threatening or scary to do, then to me that would be an indicator that some professional help would be really important. Part of what happens when you seek out a professional that is trained and experienced in this, and that you can connect with, and that you can develop a sense of trust with, at least on some level, that person provides a safe place, a safe physical space, and also a safe emotional and psychic place for whatever to emerge, whatever needs to emerge to be able to do so. Well, we have run out of time tonight, so if there's any other questions, feel free to email me. And if you'd like to take this class, I would look very much forward to discussing these things and pursuing this topic even more with you over the next few weeks. Our webinar next week, somehow I didn't get a slide for tonight, but we have another free webinar next week, being Halloween week. We're talking about how to tame the mayhem monster. And that has to do with the intensity of highly sensitive and gifted children and teens, and sometimes this can include those with ADD and ADHD, as well as sensitivity and giftedness. So it's in that context that we're going to be talking next week about how to tame the mayhem monster. Thanks so much for joining us tonight for our LifeCraft webinar, and have a great week. Bye-bye.